was in a class today with about 25 people, and they're all in a big circle, and they were asked to just feel inside and just to feel what it was like to feel themselves from the inside. And I was thinking about, well, feeling what it is to be the self. And it was like they were all feeling this, and I was wondering, wonder what they are all feeling. And I was noticing that there is a way of being that is fresh and new all the time, and it's memorable, and yet it's different, and yet, I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And then, I mean, I wonder, well, is that just an object, just like everything else is? Or
what's an object? How do you define an object?
well, pretty hard because there aren't any.
Well, what would it be if it was just an object? As compared to some condition of not being just an object.
I mean, when you just think of the self, it's not really an object, but there is a sense there of when there is a sense of identity, then there is a feeling tone. When there's just space, that's gone. But when it is there, it does seem to have a quality of being what we call self.
I don't know. I think it's very slippery myself. I think that what you might call space has all kinds of feeling tones to it. I think there's no such thing as experience without what you might call feeling tones. And there's no such thing as experience that does not have some degree of what might be called objectivity. And there's no experience that does not have what might be called some degree of subjectivity. But that's true across the board. You might define a certain arbitrarily defined set of qualities as self in relation to some other qualities you might define as not self or something, I suppose. But it's kind of arbitrary.
So would you say that there is well, I guess it's consciousness, or I mean.
You can't say what it is, can you?
You can't say what it is, but it.
And there's one actuality, and that actuality is this right here. And does it include qualities that might be thought of as self? Well, you could say so. Does it include qualities that might be thought of as objective? Well, you could say so. But when you go looking for any of these qualities, they converge and collapse down to this condition that is always exactly this condition. It's never other than this condition, and it's completely unresolvable as to exactly what this is, or how it is. And you can't isolate out sub-conditions or aspects of it. You can't isolate out some self in contrast with some otherness or something. unless you aren't looking very closely, unless you just sort of do gross generalizations, which I suppose is the mechanism that is used in order to arrive at these supposed entities that are held to exist.
So when it's sensations, then it's just sensations.
Yeah, and sensations, thinking in terms of sensory information specifically, is again a kind of an arbitrary classification of this. If you find some kind of experience that's not sensory oriented, it's exactly the same as some experience that supposedly is sensory oriented, so the discrimination between the two is kind of arbitrary. Just like you find some experience that feels like self, and you find some experience that feels like not self, you look at the experience itself and it's essentially the same thing, so discriminating between it becomes kind of arbitrary. But this condition here collapses down to itself. And if you look at any aspect of it that apparently has some uniqueness to it, or some difference from some other aspects, when you look closely at what's actually there, and you compare it to something else supposedly that is actually here, you discover they're exactly the same thing. So discriminating between them seems arbitrary. And you can discriminate, it's like how many pieces can you slice this pie into? As many as you damn well feel like. You can discriminate the field of vision in terms of color, in terms of brightness, like how many colors am I seeing right now? Oh, about 58 billion, or whatever. So, so there's to reach a subsystem, and then, how many directions am I perceiving? Well, it's a continuum, so let's just say, a million, just to sort of get a nice round. You can do that, and it's viable. But if I look at what's happening in that direction, I look at what's happening in that direction, it's ultimately the same thing. I look at what's happening with red, and I look at what's happening with blue, it's ultimately the same thing. I look at what's happening with seeing, and I look at what's happening with thinking, it's ultimately the same thing. So again, these experience can present itself with such an astounding range of apparent divergence in terms of qualities. But when you look at what's actually there, everything converges, and it clearly becomes the same thing, just this. And this applies to self and not self, and mind and matter, and consciousness, and objects, and so on and so forth. You can only hold these differentiations with conviction if you don't look very closely. And it's bewildering because the range of qualities, call them feeling tones, that's presented is completely bewildering. It's infinite. It's literally infinite. So if you're trying to sort them out or make sense of them or categorize them or put them into cubby holes or something, it's a daunting job. And most people just say fuck it and do it arbitrarily and don't notice how arbitrary they're being. But if you're honest and scrupulous and you really look at what's present, you notice wow, there's as much difference as you care to look for you can find, but it's all difference of one thing that never departs from itself. So it's never actual differences. It's different presentations or different qualitative interfaces of one thing that is intrinsically exactly itself and never departs from itself. So the experience of seeing, the experience of thinking, the experience of feeling, the experience of self, the experience of not self are all fundamentally, ultimately the same thing, experience. And it's in the nature of this very strange phenomena to look as different as you care to examine, without actually being different. I think I'm getting more pedantic in my old age.
Pedantic.
More one-eyed, shall we say?
What's that?
More one-eyed.
Teachery.
More one-eyed?
One-eyed. That's the one thing.
The problem with being with experience in terms of all these classifications is that it becomes difficult in that context to let go into the transcendence of it, to let go into the essentially open and infinite nature of it, which is its most valuable aspect. It's that aspect of it which gives liberation. It's that aspect of it which gives joy and freedom and power.
Peter, you sort of said, or just a little while ago, you said when you look closer, or notice. But I mean, when I just sort of get this sense. This presents itself.
Right.
Right? And that's why when I do try to notice or look, and it seems, familiar.
Sure.
So, even if I wasn't a seeker, or coming to this thoughts, I have a sense of this.
Of course. There's nothing else to have a sense of.
So I think,
Everyone has
being
a
open is probably really important.
Sure.
Because it's just occurring.
Yeah, sure.
And even I was talking to a friend who went to a month-long silent retreat. I just can't imagine. But he was talking about, I said, well, wasn't it hard? And he says, no. He said, actually, because my mind is talking all the time, and so I asked him a little bit more about that. But but even so, even though it's talking all the time, if you just sort of, as you say, look and see what's going on, really going on, what thought is, then you can sort of release the categories, right?
Right. Yeah, of course. Because all this categorization and designation is only a very small part of experience. And most of experience doesn't operate in those modes at all. Most of experience is much more of a textural. Most of experience is like swimming.
Yeah, right. Please.
And even though many of us, or perhaps most of us, are addicted to approaching our experience in terms of our thinking and our categorizing and our naming and designation, in actual fact, even in that case, still most of the actual experience is not like that. Most of the actual experience is very textural, very non-linear, very direct, and not designated. Most of experience deals with continuums, not with differences. But again, the trick is to notice that. It's as always, it's not a matter of doing anything different than we always have done. It's a matter of noticing what's happening, and then you discover these vast areas of experience that have nothing whatsoever to do with designations, with naming, with words, with ideas, with logics, with categories.
Right, I grant that, I mean, I know it wasn't, I know it's not that easy, but, so I guess I have to have sort of the I call it the primal noticing, just
Sure.
the first time.
Yeah.
And it's just so blows your mind, literally,
Yeah.
that, but if I hadn't ever had that experience,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would be able to appreciate the
Sure.
noticing or what's going on.
Absolutely, and that's the challenge with noticing, with spirituality, is you have to kind of get a jump start somehow. You have to kind of, bootstrap yourself on no basis into being with your experience in a fresh way. And that's just has to come the way it comes.
Yeah.
Peter, I'm starting to think maybe the body has a lot more wisdom than I've looked into, and maybe that's a good place to start. And each sense, none of the senses have any words to them, and there's a lot of energy here that's not verbal. And wonder if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean that's great. It doesn't matter really where you start. The trick is to your jumping off point, your starting point should be direct experience, and something that you're thinking of as body is fine. But one thing you'll notice is direct experience is not an idea. It's not a concept. It doesn't have labels on it. It doesn't have words to it. I mean, your mind may be able to generate thoughts about any experience, supposedly, but the experience itself is not a thought. It's not an idea. It's not, it's a textual presence. And being with that textual presence, you are being with a profound nonlinear intelligence. You're being with a profound nonlinear meaningfulness. I mean, to call it a wisdom, sure, that's great. And the trick is to be with that so that it can show you what it is in its own nonlinear terms, and you can come to appreciate it and value it as it is without needing to collapse it down to thoughts or words or ideas. And in that mode, by that technique, I don't know, the chair is a little funky. By that technique, you come to
So this light has a lot of qualities to it.
yeah, sure, infinite qualities. Yeah, the energy has all qualities exist in the energy. Any quality that can be thought to be a quality exists in the energy, and literally infinitely more than that. Qualities that aren't even designatable exist in the energy. It's inconceivable information dense. It's inconceivable meaning dense. It's inconceivable intelligence dense. And what that consists of is all these qualities.
Okay, I guess I was thrown off by the word light. I shouldn't use, I don't think I'll think of the word light. It's just stuff, or it's
Well, we don't have words for it. There's also the technical words. In India they call it Shakti.
yeah, okay.
Or prana. In China they call it Qi. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's the energy. It's the substance and energy of being itself. It's what experience is made of. And in the field of vision, we call it light. In the field of hearing, we call it sound. In the field of sensation, we call it touch, and so on and so forth. But it's all ultimately the same energy. In the field of mind, we call it thought. But the stuff is the same, and it's basic, even though it looks different in each of these different spectra, it's essentially the same, and it is I call it radiance. It is a positive dynamism that embodies infinite qualitativeness.
It's all there is.
That's all there is. And all of this variety that we populate and create entities out of and populate our life with is nothing other than its variations.
Go figure.
So, at some point, even though there's no point, something happens to you, so that becomes very apparent.
Uh-huh.
You can kind of infer that, you can kind of see how that could be, but it's not the same as just really getting it, or just
Seeing it directly.
knowing it to be so.
Yeah, of course. And this is what this mysterious process we might call spiritual unfoldment consists of. Is coming to see this, coming to see what it is more and more clearly, more and more directly. Yeah, as it is. It comes to see itself as it is. And it is what you think of as your experience or your being or your life. It always has been, but it sees itself in a confused manner, which generates the approaching of it as a life, as an individuality, as a history, as success and failure, as pain and pleasure, as all these things. But as it comes to see itself, comes to know itself more profoundly, more directly, then it sees what it truly is, which is this amazing radiance.
Well, it seems to me, Peter, as though we're looking at, like even as we discuss and have conversation, that we're like looking from out here on the side of the movie screen to kind of like try and figure out, and then as if you're looking from the other side of the movie screen out toward us. I mean, just as an analogy, that's something that I sometimes feel, is that I'm kind of looking at every, it's like trying to kind of deconstruct things to get to a place, rather than coming from a big picture and looking back at, everyday activities as sort of small and insignificant. Does that make any sense?
I don't think I followed you. It may make sense,
Yeah.
but I didn't particularly follow you,
Oh,
no.
that's good. It was a sort of follow-up to Irma's comment on the us and them
Mm.
mode, to some degree. So, I mean, you were talking about integration as happening gradually over a period of time.
Right,
And
okay.
then I guess, that works for me quite a lot of the time. And then sometimes I just go into the polarization of the us and them.
Sure.
That is sort of almost, it is kind of like the straight line and the circle, sort of like
Mhm.
trying to kind of reconcile the different ways of seeing and being.
Right. Yeah. Because what this is intrinsically is so fantastic and so multidimensional that to see it work as it truly is can be very confusing, and you can see it as these various other modes like subjectivity and objectivity and all these various other things, and actual spatiality and removal and distance and all these things, which it isn't actually, but because it is strangely multidimensional, it can seem to be that. And that's how we get to be with it so confusedly until we come to be with it more profoundly. And then we get that, all of these modes are just its multidimensionality. They aren't actually present. Space isn't actually present. Time isn't actually present. They are just examples of the slipperiness and very strange multidimensionality of what this is, of this radiance. Just like in a dream. In a dream you can experience space, you can experience entities, you can experience people, you can experience situations, you can experience problems, and you wake up and you go and you think of it and you say, well, there's nothing there at all. There wasn't any space. My eyes were closed and I was in bed. Where was all this activity supposedly happening? And yet, because of the nature of what this radiance is, or this consciousness is, it can effortlessly appear as space. It can appear as multiplicity. It can appear as different entities interacting and all of these things, when in actuality, none of that is actually the case.
I suppose my question is in a way about the reconciliation of the
Yeah, and that comes with, again, spontaneous unfoldment. You know, eventually, this begins to see itself more clearly, and which can be a chaotic seeming process of development where it sees itself and then it forgets itself and moves back and forth and so on and so forth. It's very typical. But ultimately, it spontaneously is doing the work and spontaneously comes ultimately to see itself more and more clearly and to rest in that clear, obvious, self-verifying perspective. And none of that makes sense, and you can't really make sense or sort out what that process is, because again, it's ultimately mysterious. It's not just confusing, it's intrinsically confusing if you're trying to make sense of it.
Right.
But it does itself, so you don't need to make sense of it.
But the fact that we can apprehend that in some way
Yeah.
is of value, or
Sure.
I mean, that's just what I'm noticing as I look deeply. There is a sort of sense of desire to kind of close that gap.
Sure.
And to see that actually neither one or the other is intrinsically not this.
Yeah, sure. And that is your genuine engagement in this process and appreciation and participation in it.
I'm recalling now something that I can't lose the sense of objects being, or maybe it's patterning. But I can shift between two things when I'm looking at something like a room. And I don't know what I'm doing, but in one side of the shift I'm seeing a room, and on another side of the shift I'm seeing a room, but it's surreal.
What do you mean by surreal?
I don't know, but I mean I'm looking for a word that says it. Surreal. It's not. It's exactly the same thing, but the mood is different. Magical, something.
Yeah. Well, that's fine, because that illustrates a shift of the reference or the referentiality with which you're processing the experience. And so that in itself is valuable. Whether or not either of those views is ultimately the case is irrelevant. The fact that you can experience it various ways is powerful. That means that there's some slipperiness there, which is good, because what this is intrinsically is a slipperiness. It's not that there's a true mode that this is. I mean, that's why this is so elusive and so difficult for people to approach, because it's not like, oh, it's not like that, it's not like that, it's not like that, it's like this. It's like, no, it's like any of these. It's like, what's a dream like? Well, you're never going to find it. You're never going to pin it down, because a dream isn't like a particular thing. You can know you were dreaming when you wake up and you look back and you say, yeah, I was dreaming, but what exactly is the dream? Well, it's very elusive. It's whatever, it's exactly whatever it seems to be. So seeing this as a room is absolutely true. Seeing it as light is absolutely true. Seeing it as nothing is absolutely true. Seeing it as consciousness is absolutely true. Seeing it as surreal is absolutely true. Seeing it as real and mundane and boring and uninteresting is absolutely true. And all of these absolutely viable modes are just resonances of what this is. This is that which can seem to be that way, any way that it can seem to be. So it's very mercurial. It's very protean. It's neither this nor that, and there's no way that it is or that it seems to be that it's actually any truer or less true than any other way than it is or seems to be, which makes it very strange and confusing and elusive, in a sense. But when you get that, when you get this fluidity, this I'm calling it nonlinearity, when you get this, that this can look like anything, but it is always itself, then you sort of begin to get to make the leap into the irrational way of seeing what it is. You can't see what this is rationally. It makes absolutely no sense. It's not logical in the least. You can't sort it out. You can't. It doesn't have a logical hierarchy or explanation or description or rationale or theory that can accurately apply to it or contain it. What this is it's completely bizarre. It's completely irrational. So any kind of slipperiness like that is good. It's valuable because then you're less. There'll be less of a tendency to fixate on this mode or that mode because you've got multiples, and so great. So find some more modes that the room can seem to be, and then sort of the more modes you can find that the room can seem to be, and then you sort of triangulate. Well, what includes all of that, or any of that, and that it doesn't go anywhere. It's inclusive, and then that's what this is. I mean, I'm kind of employing trickery here when I argue that, it's all just a field of light with patterning and there's no room and there's no objects. Because that's not true either. But that is a way to counter the other assertion, which is actually not any more or less true than my counter assertion, but it's just a way of destabilizing the certainty of holding it a certain way and just holding that to be objectively true. The truth is there is no objective truth. Experience is essentially subjective, so it can seem to be anything, and none of the ways it seems to be are any truer than any other ways it seems to be.
So what is the value of looking?
You discover that fact. You discover the intrinsic slipperiness and multidimensionality that this is, and freedom happens to lie there because the fact that it's not any particular way means you're not stuck in anything.
Well, that's noticing.
Yeah.
I was trying, looking seemed to me somewhat different.
I don't know. I guess I don't know what either looking or noticing is, really, so. I mean, noticing's another kind of a trick, isn't it?
It's another trick, absolutely. But to even fantasize about, is this real, or is that real, or is it not real, actually seems rather pointless.
Well, it is, but exploring that can possibly reveal the pointlessness, or not.
Okay. Yeah, as a tool. Yeah, absolutely. I see that as a tool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All of this is just tools. All of this is provisional techniques that ultimately destroy themselves. I mean, there's one analogy that's almost ultimately true, and that's the wonderful analogy from countless spiritual traditions and thousands of years, is that you use a stick to stir a fire, and the fire consumes itself, and the fire consumes the stick, and there's nothing left. So the fire is our experience, our life, and the stick is these various tricks and yogic tools and examinations and trickery that we use to challenge and destabilize the normal way we hold things. And ultimately, the way we've been holding it consumes itself in the fire, and all these tricks get consumed too. It's not like the tricks are actually true; they're just provisional techniques for the whole thing to use to be what it is.
So you could say also that Jesus or Buddha or Vishnu or whoever is just another trick.
Sure. A trick as in modern day, and a trickster in their own time.
Trickster in their own time, but I was thinking of interpreted now. It's just a
Completely a
it's just a
trick.
different-
All these things are
it's
tricks.
just a,
Or another state.
but can all be equally successful.
Yeah, they're tricks, but that doesn't mean they're not valuable.
That's right.
You know? I
Well,
mean, all
you
this,
have
all
to
this.
keep on using it because the fire will go out.
Yeah. Well, it may or may not, but that's
Well,
that's
That-
maybe
I'm
stretching the
taking it
analogy.
a little bit too far, but
Maybe
but
not.
Still,
But these tricks, you know, I mean, it's all tricks. These meetings we have are tricks. You know, any relationship you have with me is a trick. It's all trickery, but that doesn't make it valueless necessarily. It doesn't make it valuable necessarily either. That's another question mark. That's more trickery.
But ultimately, there is one truth,
Yes,
and it's absolutely knowable.
yes, that's the truth.
And everything else is
A trick.
it's either a trick or it's part of that or it's non-existent or whatever. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
Well, that one truth is what's seen as it being one thing.
Yeah, what this is real, this is true, this is the one truth, all of this is that, you are that, your life is that, your spiritual unfoldment is that, and it can't be said what that is, it can't be said how that is. Advice can't be given with regards to it. That's just how it is. But given that fact, it can be said to come to approach itself more and more profoundly as it spontaneously matures or unfolds or whatever, you know, which isn't literally or absolutely true, but is provisionally useful. And these various tricks can be useful in that process, which again isn't actually or literally true, but is useful.
and the process turns out to be a trick as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, maybe useful. So we're dealing with pragmatism, not with theoretical absolutes. In other words, what we're doing and what we talk about doesn't really have a leg to stand on.
you know, it's funny. One time on in the chat room on TV, some new person came in and was there for a while. He says, I don't know what this guy's talking about. And we all said, yeah, right.
You've got it.
That's it, you got it. Just stick around.
But it happens that what this is intrinsically very strange from most human contexts, very slippery, very nuanced, very subtle, very multidimensional. And so the fact of this ambiguity is actually useful in acclimatizing yourself to being with it. You know, the fact that it's not neither this nor that these things are both true and not true, that they're both useful and useless and all of that is actually a kind of a useful indicator in itself of the very nature of the strangeness of what this actually is. And not only of what this is, but of what its process of coming to know itself is also very strange and non-linear and unanalyzable.
Yeah, there's sort of a relief or release sometimes when that experience, I just don't know what's going on. I don't know what they're talking about, you know.
Yeah.
It's just
It's very strange. Letting go of sanity.
Hmm?
The peace and ease of letting go of sanity. I mean, what a load off.
you know.
Letting go of the pretense of sanity, I should say.
So to go back to where we were starting tonight, and what I often hear people say, well, what's the one thing you do know? And what you can't deny is that you are. That there's, you know that you're conscious. you know that you're here.
Well, I would say that's going too far. I would say that this is, but I can take you are as a paraphrase of this
Right.
is, so that's fine.
So those sensations or feelings of consciousness and being is just another, it's just the same energy, just configured in it.
Of course,
It's just that.
everything is. There's nothing
It's
but.
no special, no, so it's just on the same level with everything else.
There's only one level.
There's only
The absolute.
one level.
There's only one level, the Dharmakaya. Or the Atman for those of you the Indian persuasion.
And who's to say if that's level?
What I get mileage out of in that question of paraphrasing and saying, I exist, what I find really intriguing is not to say I exist because I can immediately I say, sure, I exist, or this is. But how do I know that I exist? When I start examining how I know I exist, I really get into something very strange.
Sure.
How do I know that I exist? I know I exist. And probably everybody does. They'll immediately say they exist. But how do you know you exist? Because there's something that knows that.
Right. Yeah.
And that's weird.
That's the only reason you know that existence. The only reason existence exists is because existence knows existence exists.
Yeah,
Existence is aware of itself.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's very weird.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's very weird, but it goes to the very root of things. It's the essential condition, is that this knows itself. The very nature of what this is that it knows itself.
Yeah, that seems to be a deeper question than just, well, not deeper.
But it reveals the strange nonlinearity and the strange circularity of this. This exists in itself. This is doing itself. It's like the image of a snake eating its tail. This exists because it knows it exists. It's not resting on anything. There's nothing causing it. There's no fundamental actuality that it's based on. It's based on itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the knowing and the existing are the same.
Yeah.
Same identical thing.
Yeah.
It's not an subject-object thing.
Yeah, it exists because it knows, and it knows because it exists. So
That's
it's very weird. It's surpassingly weird, dizzying. But knowing and existence are two words for exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certain shit. But doing that exercise, at least for me, gets me out of those abstractions.
Good, yeah. Good, excellent, yeah.
Uh,
And that's the point of the point of any and all of these tricks, is to re-engage you, or to engage you more profoundly in the actuality of present real-time experience, of real-time experiencing. Because that's where the juice is, not in abstracting about it or being with it peripherally, but really just this actuality, being engaged in this actuality. And it is engaged in itself, and noticing that fact collapses you into that engagement. And then you are able to be with your experience primally as its engagement with itself, which is the fundamental event, the fundamental action. I mean, all of these sacred images of deities with their consorts and of, yab-yum images of all of that is just this primal engagement, this primal, that this is knowing itself. This is, intrinsically and fundamentally and most radically a knowing of itself. It is turned into itself. It's turned on itself. And this is what our experience is nothing other than that primal fact of this transcendental event of the absolute knowing itself. This right here, that's what this is. And to see the fundamental, absolutely fundamental nature of that, absolutely transcendental nature of that, is wonderful. It reveals what it is, and it completely transcends all these absurd notions of individuality and humanity and what have you.
So Peter, one of the things that I've recently been doing is since I get very invested in all the abstractions and I'm always trying to see through them, but I can't seem to make headway. But what I've recently been doing is, like, every couple of hours throughout my day I'll go out and I'll look at the sky. And I can see the energy swirling around, and it's like I kind of like shift out of the relative world and I go into this different, kind of like whatever.
Great.
And so I'm just wondering, but then I go back into my linear environment and I'm going back to all the abstractions and all that, and it's like it's almost like I don't know how I could function if I was out of that kind of conceptual, abstraction mode. And so that's kind of confusing to me.
Well, you would be able to. First of all, what you're doing is very good because you're sort of acclimatizing yourself and getting more used to being with your experience in a more nonlinear way, in a less abstract way. And as you become more familiar with the sort of the modes of flow within that experience, you will notice that those same modes of flow actually exist within your experience that you're typically abstracting and being rational with, and so on and so forth. So in other words, the two will tend to fuse, and you'll see that your normal experience will become transmuted from the inside, so to speak, by your becoming more and more familiar with these sort of more direct modes. And second of all, in terms of being able to function, that's not a problem at all, because your abstracting function, your linear and rational functioning, is already an outgrowth of this intrinsic flowing functioning, always has been. That's where it came from. And that came first. When you were 3 months old in your crib, you weren't very good at abstracting. You were very expert in just and so that is actually the basis of your functional modes, and your functional modes are developed. They're developed through history. They're developed through practice, and there's no reason they need to be forgotten or no longer be available if you spend more time noticing and more time participating in this more, call it spontaneous or nonlinear way of being with your experience. Because they're not an either-or. They're not mutually exclusive. So you don't actually become dysfunctional when you let go of linearity. On the contrary, you might find you become even more functional.
Yeah, her question reminded me that there's actually a third way. You can also see things as sparkles, and tig leaves flying through the room and all of that too.
Sure. Sure.
There's three. It's surreal, it's ordinary, and it's sparkly.
Uh-huh.
But where does that take me?
Well, the next thing I would suggest playing with is notice that those three modes aren't actually mutually exclusive. They don't need to be one or the other. You can have sort of in-between modes where it's a little bit one, a little bit another, but not really either.
Look between them.
I mean, play with it, see what happens.
So I was listening to one of the audios, the recent ones, where I appreciated your definition of death, which was just you said that it was a different kind of presence.
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting.
Well, it'll be the same kind of presence, but a different appearance of presence.
Yeah.
And there's nothing but, because presence is constantly appearing in different ways. That's the only constant is freshness and newness.
So you said a different kind of presence?
Well, no, it's the same kind of presence, it's a different apparition of
different
presence,
appearance.
a different appearance of presence.
Okay.
Just like sleep is a different appearance of presence than waking life is. Being here looking at me is a different presence than walking out the door and going to your car, in terms of what it appears as, but the way in which it's present is the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's you experiencing here and now, right?
Yeah. So if someone close to you dies, then is it a different appearance to me of their presence, or?
Both. It's different to you, but it's different to you anyway. If you're sitting with them and you're thinking of them as alive, they're talking, and so you're seeing them talk, and then in between, when they're saying something, they're sitting there quietly. And then suppose they go to sleep, then they're just sitting there breathing. And suppose they die, then they're just sitting there not breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a change in each instance, but it's just the same presence, and they're appearing in a different mode.
Mm-hmm.
And you could, if you sat with them, if their body could sit around for a few months and not be taken away, and you just sat with them, that would also continue to change. And from their point of view, it's the same thing. It's like as the body ceases to function, then you stop experiencing sensory information when your central nervous system starts to shut down and so on, and so that starts to look very different. But it's just a difference in degree to what it looks like when you go to sleep, say, or when you start dreaming. When you go to sleep, things look very different. But it's still just you here now experiencing.
And presence.
Yeah, presence. I mean, presence is a euphemism for that. You here now experiencing. I mean, presence is the only thing there really is. And everything we think about reality is just based on cataloging the different ways presence can seem to appear. Right? But it's always the same presence.
Yeah, when I think of presence, I think of awareness, and then when I understand awareness is just awareness of everything that's happening in the space, like even thoughts and fantasies and narratives and stories. It's just all of that.
Sure.
Just in the space.
Sure. Whatever's happening is present, and where it's present, it could be said to be in awareness. Sure. So awareness and presence are one and the same.
And that's all we really have is awareness and presence.
You can't find anything else. Everything else or anything else is just a mode of apparition of that, right? You could say it exists in that. You can't find anything that doesn't exist in your awareness. How would you find it? How would you experience it if it wasn't in your awareness? And if it's in your awareness, then it's present. You're having a fantasy, it's present. As fantasy. You're having a dream, it's present. You're going to sleep, it's present. You're dying, it's present. And exactly what presence is, it cannot be said. It's completely transcendental. It's completely strange. Even as it's totally obvious, it's right here, right now. Your experience is present right now, right? It's just completely obvious. It's trivial. It's so obvious. But you go look for what exactly is this presence? What is this presence? How is this present? And you'll see that it's very, very strange. Even though it's so obvious and so undeniable, you can't find it. Because it's inconceivably weird. It's inconceivably bizarre.
So if presence is synonymous with knowing,
Absolutely.
then this is knowing itself. And any sense of self is just an overlay. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, it's just a mode of this knowing
nothing to do.
itself. So self is just this knowing itself. Other is just this knowing itself. The floor is just this knowing itself. Your feeling of your body is just this knowing itself. Just like whatever seems to appear to you in a dream is just the dreaming consciousness knowing itself, which is actually just this knowing itself. Because saying the dreaming consciousness is just a euphemism for this. Because what exactly is the dreaming consciousness? Yeah. I mean, that's the weird thing. This is totally transcendental. You can't pin it down, and yet it's completely obvious, front and center, undeniable, in your face. You can't. You can't possibly distance yourself from it, even the tiniest bit. It's like, it's your very being. It's closer than close. It's your very being.
Larger than life.
And yet you can't find it. It's completely elusive. It's completely transcendental. But it really is. It really is that. That's not just a little side thing. And oh boy, isn't that interesting? It's like, no, this is really, it's everything. It's right here. It's completely obvious, and it's absolutely nothing. It's absolutely nothing.
Well, in terms of these triangulating different paradigms, instead of me experiencing this, it's it experiencing it.
Right.
So every time there's an experience, it's its experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what's seeing through your eyes. It's what's seeing your thoughts. It's what's feeling your body. And when it feels your body, it's feeling itself. When it thinks your thoughts, it's thinking itself. And it sees through your eyes, it's seeing itself.
But that could be just as much of an abstraction as a self.
The thought of it is an abstraction, but the actuality is not an abstraction.
It's just
Your vision is being seen. That's not an abstraction. That's a fact.
Right.
And you cannot, if you go looking for what's seeing your vision right now, and if you go looking for what's being seen in your vision right now, you come up against the same absolute transcendence. And that's not an abstraction. I mean, it's as concrete as it comes. If it is, if you say, well, there's no concreteness and it's all abstraction, well, you can say that, and that's fine. But still in all, go to the extreme of actuality, which is not an abstraction, and see how it's appearing. And it will be appearing as being experienced and as an experience. And when you go looking for either end of that, what's experiencing it or what's being experienced, it's like a mirage, you don't find anything. And yet, it's right here, completely present, completely clear, completely actual. I mean, this is actual. This is as concrete as it gets. This is the very nature of concreteness. You can't find more concreteness than the presence of this experience. It literally does not exist. This is concrete, solid, actual, real, and yet you go looking for it, you don't find anything.
You just leave it at that.
Yeah.
That it's just happening.
Yeah. If that, whatever that means.
Except you can't go further than that.
Because you can't find happening either. I mean, maybe it's happening, maybe it's not happening. Compared to what?
Well, it's happening all as the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah, everything
that's another
collapses.
step.
Yeah, everything collapses to this. Everything collapses to this. You go look for what's seeing or experience, it collapses to this. You go looking for what's being seen, it collapses to this. You go looking for happening, it collapses to this. Go look for meaning, it collapses to this. Go look for purpose, it collapses to this. Go look for process, it collapses to this. Everything. And this, again, is completely obvious, completely actual, and completely unfindable. Always.
Completely unfindable.
Absolutely. It's undeniable, it's self-verifying, and it's completely unfindable.
But it's also found.
Yeah, it's completely found. It's as found as anything can be.
Yeah.
Talk about being up against the wall.
If you could find a wall.
So Peter often mentioned this exercise of covering your eyes up and seeing the light.
Uh-huh.
So when we do that, we're actually seeing the radiance, right?
Of course.
That's what the radiance. It's that sparkling light.
Yeah. And then when you open your eyes, you're seeing the radiance still.
Only it's patterned.
It's a different degree of patterning. Same radiance. The radiance stays constant, and radiance is never stops. In your field of vision, for example, your eyes are open, it's full of light, full of radiance. You close your eyes, it's full of light, full of radiance. You go to sleep, it's full of radiance. You start dreaming, it's full of radiance. You wake up, it's full of radiance. The only thing that changes is the sort of modes and degrees and qualities of patterning. But ultimately, if you look closely, the modes of patterning are always the same, in the sense that they are always dynamic, they're always unstable, and they're always indefinable, indeterminate. In other words, no matter how sharp the pattern seems to be, when you look closer, it's not sharp.
Yeah, the patterning, at least this mode of patterning, feels more distracting than if I were to close my eyes and see that kind of patterning.
Yeah, but you've been trained, you've been brainwashed to think that this patterning matters because it's a world and your survival, and it depends upon your behavior and interaction with certain objects in this world, and so on and so forth. Whereas you've also been trained that the patterns you see when you close your eyes don't matter at all. They're unimportant, they don't exist, they have no importance to you whatsoever. But if you look nakedly without any conceptualization at all, you'll discover they're actually just the same. And it's easy to think that what you see when you close your eyes is more chaotic, but if you look at it when you familiarize yourself with it, I mean, let me back up. What you see with your eyes, you sort of move into it. When you walk into a new space, you see everything that's there, but you sort of, there's a process of being with it a second or two or even a minute, where you sort of slowly settle into it and concretize it and recognize the things and look around and take in the detail and sort of build it into a picture in your head. And even though you think that you walk into a place you've never been, you see it right away. Of course, you do see it right away, but there's a process of sort of stabilizing the patterns and identifying them and sort of building a map unconsciously in your head of what's there. And if you close your eyes, you'll discover exactly the same thing happens. At first you close your eyes and you just see sort of like myriads of infinitesimal flashes, and they sort of form rough clumps of sort of cloud-like shapes or various things, can't really say. But then you hang out there for 5 seconds or 10 seconds or a minute, and you'll notice an enormous complexity of patterns within patterns and little nuances and halos and, all sorts of shapes begin to form subtly in these dots. And you'll discover you're inhabiting an environment of inconceivable complexity. And it's very unstable and it's dynamic, but there's also degrees of stability, there's degrees of flow, there's degrees of this sort of texture changes into that texture and all of that. And so even though it's an environment that you're used to thinking of as, nothing, it's just after images or noise in my retina or whatever, experientially, it's a very complex field of patterning, of patterned radiance. And when you open your eyes, it's a very complex field of patterned radiance. And it's ultimately the same phenomena. If you look with your eyes open, you'll notice that what you're seeing is myriad tiny little dots, little flashes. It's not a monolithic thing. You look at a wall, just look at a blank wall for 10 seconds and you'll notice that right away. It just starts, the whole thing sort of just starts to pulsate and you're seeing all these little dots. You close your eyes and lo and behold, it's the same thing you're seeing with your eyes closed, although with a different degree of brightness and color and so on.
Just a different resolution.
Yes, exactly. But it's the same fundamental phenomenon. That's the important point. There's always radiance, and the field of radiance is always full. Your field of vision is always full. There's never a time when there's no light present in your field of vision. Your field of hearing is always full. There's never a time when there's not sound present in your field of hearing. Your field of sensation is always full. The patterns that can seem to be there and the quality of those patterns can have an inconceivably broad range of presentation, but it's always fullness, always full. And there's no coming or going. There's never a loss. It's never like there's less light or less sensation or less hearing. There can be a transformation of quality. You say you close your eyes, all of a sudden, no, there's less light. It's not less light, it's just a different quality of light.
So would the resolution out in this mode of patterning, it'd be a lower resolution than it would be, say, if you...
Maybe, but that's just qualifying it. Again, it becomes, ultimately you can't qualify it because the resolution is as high or as low as you care to look in either environment. And you can play with that. I mean, experiment for yourself and look and see. You can spend 10 minutes with your eyes closed and try not to just space out into thought system. Try to really be with your field of vision and see what you can see, as if you were looking out of a picture window at a scene, and really trying to see what's there, and so you be with it very concretely. In other words, and you'll discover the way in which the patterning appears, the way in which it's dynamic, the way in which it's elaborated. I mean, all this is very plain to see. And then open your eyes and you'll see the same thing. You close your eyes, you'll see the same thing, and you can see if you really explore it, experiment unbiasedly, you'll discover that what's going on there is always the same mechanism of the very nature of this radiance. And the intelligence that perceives it, which is one with the radiance.
Sometimes I'm going to sleep, I watch the light, and it works like a Rorschach sometimes. I see something over here that, in the clouds of light, it looks like this or that, and zoom, I'm dreaming.
Sure.
And the whole thing, it's like I'm interpreting all of this. The mind is interpreting, plastering on like I put the energy of thought. I'm putting thoughts onto that, and the energy of this light. I'm putting a dream onto that.
Sure. Yeah.
And interpreting it as something.
Yeah.
But it goes out of my control. It starts with something in my control. I see an elephant in the clouds, and pretty soon there's a drama going on.
Yeah. And the same thing happens in the waking world, although we're generally less aware of it. Our interpretation of what's going on in any situation is just like that. We get a hit on some pattern of something, and then it takes us off into a whole mode of being in a situation of and typically it's subliminal, i.e. unconscious. We aren't particularly aware of it. But in the same thing, when you go into a dream, it's subliminal and unconscious. You're not particularly aware of it. It just sort of unfolds itself.
Well, I made that connection when you're talking about going into a room. At first it hasn't congealed into anything.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, exactly so. It's always the phenomena is always the same on any level of experience. It's always the same. Well, it's about quitting time, so I'll wish good night to the online people. I'm sorry our broadcast cut out in the middle there.
I think that